1 a penny, 2 a penny, hot cross buns. If you've no daughters, give them to your sons. And if you've no kind of pretty little elves, why then, good faith, e'en eat them all yourselves. When it comes to baked goods, there aren't many that have permeated the culture so much that children sing about them. What's the big fuss? Let's find out today. So I was grocery shopping the other day and I saw some hot cross buns sitting out over in the bakery department. And honestly, they didn't look all that good, but I almost bought them anyway until I thought, I could just make them. I've made them before. They're fun to make. They're so tasty. I've got all of these cookbooks sitting on the shelf, and it turned out quite a few of them had recipes in them for hot cross buns. I had the system choose one at random, and it chose the Laurel's Kitchen Bread Book. We've baked from this book before, the Scottish bread. It took 2 days to make. It was just fantastic. Flipping through the recipes, this definitely looked like the most complex. It uses dried fruits and nuts. It uses whole wheat flour, all like real ingredients. And I'm sure it's going to be the most delicious, but it's kind of complicated. It's going to take not 2 days, but it's going to take most of today to make. There's a few things that we need to do first to get prepared. We need a cup of walnuts, and we're going to lightly toast them in the oven to bring out the oils and the flavors. We've also got a cup of dried apricots, and we're going to heat those up in the oven too to soften them up and bring out their oils just like we are with the nuts. It'll make them easier to chop before we put them into the dough. And then we need 2 cups of raisins. I've got these beautiful currants. We're going to heat these up too to soften them up a little bit more, bring out those flavors as well. But we're not going to do that in the oven because that would just dry them out a little bit. I've got a little steamer basket, and we'll just put them in here, and we'll just let those steam up a little bit. I've gathered all the ingredients, and I'm already exhausted. It was a lot. As I was reading the recipe, I saw at the very end that she says that this is a fun recipe to make, especially when you have somebody you can work with to make them together. And I understand why now. There's a lot of things to gather. I took the currants off the steam and cooled them off so they're nice and plump. I took the apricots out of the oven and chopped them up. I took the walnuts and chopped them up too. So those are all ready in kind of equal sized pieces. Then I took a little bit of yeast and mixed that with water and set that aside. Got some buttermilk, some honey, and our honey had crystallized in the cupboard, but it's totally fine. The yeast aren't going to care for sure. I took half a stick of butter and brought that up to room temperature so it's nice and soft. We're going to work that into the dough later on. Hot water. And in my big bowl here, 8 cups of whole wheat flour and a couple teaspoons of salt all mixed together. And I've got a little well in the center so we can add our liquids in the middle and then knead it all together here in just a couple minutes. All right, so I've got a bowl here, and I'm just going to mix together the hot water and the honey and just stir those together. And then I've got a couple eggs. And I took out 3 tablespoons from the eggs, put those back in the fridge. We're going to use that later on for a wash, an egg wash over the buns before we bake them. And the water is hot, but not so hot it's going to scramble the eggs, hopefully. And then the buttermilk. Then back to our big bowl. We're just going to pour this liquid right into the center. And there's going to be a lot of hand kneading with this dough. So my hands are washed very clean. But we're going to start just with this little dough whisk that I have. Oh, almost forgot to also add the water with the yeast. It's going to make kind of a sticky dough. I love this dough whisk. So she wants us to keep our hands wet as we knead the dough. That's going to work in some more moisture. So I've got a bowl of just plain water sitting here. And the whisk has done a great job of bringing everything together. But I'm going to just use my hands from here on out, I think. And this bowl is nice and wide, so I can easily get my hands in there. Later on, I'm going to roll it out onto the tabletop. But for now, we can just do everything in the bowl, kind of keep it contained. Get my hands nice and wet, and in I go. Now, normally hot cross bun dough is pretty heavily seasoned with what they call winter spices, cinnamon and nutmeg and mace and cloves, things like that. But with this recipe, she says those will damage the gluten in the whole wheat flour. Maybe the sharp little edges of the ground spices in there cut through the proteins, or I don't know the science behind it. But we don't want these things to be dense. So anything we can do to help the gluten fluff things up, the better, I think. So I'm following her advice, not adding them to the dough itself. And instead, you'll see later on, those spices will be a component in the glaze that we put on top. And then also we're going to dust the pans underneath the buns before we bake them. So some of those flavors will get baked into the bottoms of the buns. I'm glad we're not foregoing those spices altogether, because for me, that's an important part of the whole experience of a hot cross bun is those flavors. I think I'm going to take it out of the bowl now and just work onto the tabletop. Okay, when I pull on the dough, it springs back. So we can go ahead and work the butter in. Add the butter in the French manner by smearing it on the tabletop and kneading until all the butter has been incorporated. Got my 1/4 cup of butter and smear it onto the tabletop, and then just knead the dough until it's all worked in. I don't know if this mat is working with me or against me at this point, but it would be better than having all this stuff right on the wood. It's kind of a wet, slimy hunk of dough at this point. We're also going to knead in the nuts and fruit now. Let's see how easy that is going to be. She says just like a handful or so at a time. Okay, and then we just knead the dough until everything is spread nice and evenly. I think this might be enough. It's nice and soft. So there we go, we've got a nice ball of dough. We're gonna put it back in our bowl and cover it with a towel and just let it sit for about an hour and a half. We just need to punch it down, get the air out of it, and then let it do this all over again. It should rise in about half the time. So punch it down, put the towel back on, and we'll see you in about 45 minutes. The book had a whole section about what to do here. It said while the second rise was happening, we needed to prepare our baking strategy. She gave 2 different sizes of buns that we could do, the regular size and then little tiny mini ones. I'm going to go with just the regular size. Seems like less work, and it's going to make 30 buns, which is already plenty. I don't need even more tiny ones. The 30 buns are spread across 2 sheets, and she said we needed 12 by 18 sheet pans, which I have. I've got 2 of those. I also have 2 ovens, so I can bake them both at the same time. Part of the strategy is figuring out, do you need to bake them in batches or not? We've got the spice mix. It's optional, and I really wanted the flavor of the spices, so it's cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg and cardamom and ginger. And what we're going to do is oil or grease the pans, and really I don't have to do that because I've got these silicone mats, but I think it's going to help the spices stick a little bit better. And then sprinkle the spices on. Now, the dough itself, it looks very much like it did last time. I'm going to punch it down just like we did before. And then since we have 2 pans, I'm going to cut it in half and just work with half at a time. Look how beautiful that is inside. We're going to give them about 10 minutes for the dough to kind of relax, to get over being shaped the way all roughly like I just did. That'll give the dough a little chance to soften, and I'll come back and press down gently just to kind of flatten them off a little bit. Not like a smash burger or anything crazy like that, just kind of flatten them a little bit. If we don't do that, these will make spheres, and the shapes for hot cross buns have more of a flat top. So we'll shape them And then we'll give them about a half hour to rise before we bake them. The last thing to do before they go into the oven is to give them indentations in the shape of a cross that we'll later fill in with some of the icing. To do that, she says, just take a spatula and press down halfway, but not so much that we're going to cut the dough. We just want to press it down enough that the indentation will remain throughout the baking. So press down about halfway. And it'll be easier if we keep them in a nice line when we go later on and fill them with the icing. Now across. And that will give them the characteristic shape of a hot cross bun. Now this is traumatic to the dough again, so we're going to let it rest just a couple of minutes, just to let it loosen back up. And they'll go into the oven 375. And she doesn't say how long to bake them. I don't know if that was just an omission or if I'm expected to just know when to take bread out at this point. Looking at some of the other bun recipes in the book, it looks like about 20 minutes. So we'll do that after these have rested about 3 minutes. After that, we'll make the glaze, not the frosting, not the white stuff, but an actual honey cinnamon glaze that's going to go over the top immediately after they come out of the oven. So I'll check on them in 15 minutes, take a look at the bottoms and move them around if I need to. In the meantime, we can make the glaze. 3 tablespoons of honey and a tablespoon of butter, and we just want to heat those up so that they melt. And then put in, she says, a half teaspoon of cinnamon, but I still have some of that leftover mix. And I'm going to also put in a little bit more than what she says, just to spice it just a little extra, because I think I will like that. So we'll let the honey melt and the butter melt, and when it comes just to a boil, we'll take it off again and set it off to the side and let it cool, and then it should be ready to use when the buns come out of the oven. It smells great with those spices in there. All right, I would say that's a boil. They look good, and I don't think they're going to be too wet on the inside. You can see they're nice and fluffy, not too dense. She says immediately after taking them out of the oven, brush the glaze on. The buns have cooled off, and so now we can make our white icing to make the crosses on top. I've got just some powdered sugar, 3 cups, and I've got a little bit of that spice mix left over. I think that'll be good in here. So I'll just dump that in. And then we're going to add a little bit of vanilla, then just enough milk to give it the consistency that we want. And it's not going to take much, a couple of tablespoons at the most. All right, there we go. That looks thick enough to pipe onto the buns. Now I've got a big old bag of frosting, and I'll just take a corner and just cut off just a little bit. And then let's just run a line of icing right down the buns, trying to fill in that little indentation that we made. And then side to side. And there we have it. So this recipe was complicated, but the results were delicious. They taste like maybe a healthier version of a regular hot cross bun, but not in a bad way or anything. The whole wheat flour gives it kind of a nuttiness, and the real fruits, the mix of fruits and the spices were fantastic. Maybe a little denser, perhaps, than the white flour versions that I've bought and have made before. The little crosses on the top were white sugar icing. A more traditional recipe might have a white flour paste that gets put over the tops, not sweet at all. I like the sweetness that this gives. I thought that I wouldn't. Since this version of the buns were a little heartier and didn't have the spices inside the dough itself, having it mixed in with the glaze and with the icing cross really brought them to the forefront, and I appreciated that. Making these has reminded me how much I love hot cross buns and why I should be making them more often, not saving them for Easter. They're just a delicious little snack. They're not overly sweet. It's not like having a donut or a cinnamon roll. The flavors are more complex than those pastries, and the addition of the fruits and the nuts just makes it a more nourishing treat. I'll be trying some of the other recipes as well, and maybe blending some of my favorite aspects of them all together to make them truly my own. One interesting thing that I saw recently was the addition of grains of paradise, which was something that I used in a previous video. I think that would give an interesting little kind of a peppery bite to these. So that's definitely one thing I'll be trying. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to the next random recipe that we make together. Please like and subscribe, share the video, comment down below, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.